Hello, everyone. Welcome. I just now realize how much I have missed seeing real faces in the audience. Thanks for being here. I'm going to introduce the speakers and myself because I don't want to assume you know who we are. So Hanna Israel is the head of a political dialogue platform called My Country Talks that sets up one-to-one discussions between people with opposing viewpoints. Faigle is a special projects editor at Zeit Online. They also work with My Country Talks. And it's Germany's leading news site. They initiated the 49, a group of German people that statistically look like the German society in its whole. And Emily Kasriel, head of special project at the BBC. She led innovative, high-quality journalism projects as Crossing Divides that she will talk to you about. It's a season which was about bringing people with different viewpoints together to build connections across those divides. And I'm Nina Fasciaux. I'm the Europe Manager and International Coordinator at the Solution Journalism Network. And I was thinking, just before coming here, because I'm coming from the panel on Putin's war, we talk a lot about what divides us. And so I'm French, and my grandfather used to tell me stories about what differentiates German, French, and British people a lot. And I'm from a generation that feels above all a European citizen. And so my focus has always been what unites us instead of what divides us. And when there are innovation in journalism, but not only, it's often because we feel like we need to fix a problem. And so my colleagues here have found creative, fascinating, innovative ways of fixing a problem that the media has some responsibilities in, that is increasing polarization. Some numbers. The 2020 Reuters digital news reports told us that less than half of the people say they trust the news they use. 60% prefers news that has no particular point of view, and only 28% prefer news that shares or reinforces their views. There is a nonprofit called More in Common. They have offices in the US, but also in France and Germany. And they found out that the more US consumers are informed, the less they are able of understanding somebody with an opposing viewpoint. In Germany, 75% of people feel that public debates has become increasingly hateful. They feel like it's increasingly difficult to speak openly without being attacked. In France, 9 in 10 people say the public debate is more and more aggressive. Our presidential elections are on Sunday, and I really feel like it. 49% describe their ideal country like a place where actually we would listen and respect each other. So what does the media can do to fix that, and what our role is into building bridges between people who disagree? That's what my colleagues here have been exploring. And I'll start with you, Emily, if you want to take us through the Crossing Divide season and all the work you've done to build bridges between people who disagree.
Thank you so much, Nina, for a really beautiful introduction. introduction. Now, I assume that most of you... Sorry, I wasn't using my mic. Just asking if people are journalists, which I make an assumption. And how well do you think you listen? How do you rate your listening skills? 1 to 5. I get a tentative 4, 3, pretty good numbers of those who chose to share. But if we ask ourselves a really honest question, do we really listen? And if we did listen, what would that look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like to us? And what would it feel like to the person who is speaking? Because research suggests that if people feel really heard, they're much more likely to have deeper thoughts and then share a more authentic narrative. So next month, we'll be celebrating the BBC centenary I'll be training 1,000 people in more than 100 countries in a partnership between the BBC and the British Council in deep listening. And I was really inspired to explore this area after running the Crossing Divide season. The reasons for which we did it are so beautifully articulated by Nina. Now, I wanted to know, because I was bringing people in so many different fields and encouraging different bits of the BBC, it's a bit of a giant octopus, you might well know, to engage and broadcast and publish more Crossing Divides conversations. And then I became curious, how do we have more successful Crossing Divides conversations? So I researched deep listening as a practitioner in residence at LSE, and I wrote up my research in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. If you're interested, happy to send it to you. And also I went on a wonderful course with Nina in Montana in a ranch run by mediators. I mean, it was really tough, yeah? And I've also been a coach for many years in practice. But I found that when we're in a crossing divide situation, it might be with somebody with very differing thoughts and beliefs. It might be with our kids or our parents we feel vehemently different towards. All of that just goes out the window. And what we do is we are just thinking of how to come up with a perfect retort to their argument. We're what they call preloading our verbal gun with ammunition. Anybody do that? Anybody recognize that? Huh? So... Nobody. So in May, over 3 weeks, 2 hours a week, I'm going to be giving young people, age 18 to 35, the opportunity to practice these skills, to learn more about these skills, before at the end week, giving them the opportunity to have that crossing divides conversation and try and use these skills. And we'll be featuring 5 of these pairs on BBC TV, news and online and digital across global and domestically. So I just thought, you probably, many of you might be counselors, you might be coaches, you might think that you know a lot about listening, and I'll just give you a few tips and a few thoughts. I think, in a way, what's most important is learning to listen to yourself. So you're aware when you're really passionate about something and you've got a vested interest, and then you note it and you say, I've got some thinking to do here, that I feel this strongly and this indignant that I'm right, and put it to the side till later. Now, journalists, they like to ask fantastic questions. That's what we think we're good at, we're journalists. But they take us down our avenue and not necessarily the road that the speaker wants to travel. So instead, and put temporarily your questions aside, you can ask them later, you might well need to ask them later, and follow the train of thought of the person speaking. You can sum up the core of what they said. Not parrot, not taking notes, but you open your heart to think of the essential essence of what that person has said, and then offer it back to them tentatively. Not just words, but also emotions and the music between the words. Now, I'm going to give you a little demo at the end of the discussion with a volunteer on a very easy subject. So we were thinking, because of COVID, whether we've got to do it with Nina, but we found a way, a chair that somebody can sit on and do it COVID-friendly. So we feel quite confident about this project, if a little bit hesitant. We are working with academics to evaluate it in a very rigorous way, because last year I trained 150 people in Lebanon virtually in these skills over 3 weeks, and I've just been interviewing them, finding out about what differences it's made to their lives. And one woman said for sure she would be divorced had she not been on this course. If you want to read about that, if you just look up my name, Lebanon, BBC, you can find a bit more about it. And even though we've now got over 1,000 people from 100 countries, they're not that well spaced. There's still quite a lot of room. So if you're 18 to 34, or you know somebody who is, speaks really good English, because we're doing it just in English, and has got a good internet connection, if you search the link there, you can sign up. Deadline, end of play, Friday. Nina.
Thank you, Emily. I'm really looking forward for that demo, but don't be afraid. She's really nice. Okay, Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nina. I'm actually here for the first time ever in Perugia, and it's really, really beautiful. I'm just hoping for more sun, but I think it will be here soon, or it already came out. I'm going to tell you a bit about what we're doing at Zeit Online with a platform called My Country Talks.
Can we have the slide up? Okay.
Basically what we do is that we are putting together people who have never met into one-on-one discussions about controversial political topics. And those people think completely different from each other. One is in favor of more migration, the other is not. One is really for changing our climate policies to save this planet, and the other is thinking that maybe climate change doesn't really exist. And this idea came up back in 2017 when, well, in a context of when Trump got elected as president of the United States, when Brexit was happening, or when people voted for the Brexit, and when we saw a high rise of right-wing populists in Germany. And so we thought about how would it actually be to kind of reconnect society, to put a green voter together with someone from the right-wing populist, and let them talk one-on-one, only themselves, without any audience, about controversial topics. And we reached out to our readers, asked them whether they wanted to join this project, and we thought there might be, well, 500 to join. But in the end, more than 12,000 people signed up to have this discussion, which made us think that there might be a reason to professionalize this whole thing, build a software which is able to match people on the basis of controversial questions. And we've been doing that, well, for 5 years now in Germany, but we also had different formats in other countries, such as the US, in Britain, in Ukraine, in the Netherlands, Austria, many European countries. We also have a format which is called Europe Talks, where we're putting together people into cross-border conversations, and we're hoping for many more, but I'll come back to that later. How does this actually work? So we have built a software which includes an embed, and we'll include that into the articles of us or our media partners. And it is basically the aim to natively show to readers an embed within an article and engage them through controversial questions. So they only see at first one question, and once they click on either the yes or no, they get redirected to a whole questionnaire. And only at the very end, they're actually being explained to what this is all about and whether they want to have a conversation with someone they have never met. So one thing is that we're putting those people together, giving them the opportunity to have a talk, but we're also covering some of those conversations, not all. It's about thousands of conversations, but some of them are being watched by reporters, are being, well, kind of evaluated. So we send reporters, we send photographers, we ask them to join the conversation, and then we write about it. And this is crucial because this is something we kind of want to change in how to portray conflict. If there's two people that are very opposed to each other, at some point we realize in those conversations that there's also something that holds them together. So we did have pairs that were very opposed on migration. Yeah, one was actually voting for the AfD, and the other one was kind of working in a refugee shelter. But at some point during the conversation, they really recognized and realized that there's something that they have in common, that they have the same moral values on how people should be dying in our country, like what death means to us. And that kind of made them come together, or made them come a bit closer despite all their differences. So what we aim to achieve is that people kind of can agree on disagreeing. And something that is also crucial to this whole approach is that by reporting on those stories, or by reporting on those conversations, we're giving people the opportunity to be heard in big national media outlets. So it's their voices that we're representing, and that is something that is normally not happening with normal people. And this is a way to restore trust, because they're seeing themselves or people that are similar to them being covered. And this is really crucial in order to kind of re-establish a connection to society for journalists, but also in order to establish trust. And we did have a few studies on that, and it is actually very positive what we're hearing, because once those people are put together, it increases empathy, it helps to reduce stereotypes, and also it is able to reduce affective polarization. So the thing that kind of became a problem in our societies, because ideological polarization is fine. I mean, we need differentiation, right? People need to disagree on content, on policy issues. But once you think that someone, just because it has he or him has a different opinion on something, should be disrespectful, that makes kind of society go wrong. That makes a problem. And so it is able to kind of reduce affective polarization once those two people meet in a private setting and have a conversation about controversial topics. And because this is working so well, what we're trying to achieve in the next year is to actually put this on a global scale, to match people from totally different parts of the world into one-on-one conversations. We think that there's so many problems lying ahead of us that we can only solve as a global community. And so there are certain topics that should be looked at as a global community. And that's why by putting people together into one-on-ones, we want to create kind of the first step that is necessary to do such things, which is create empathy. And we still don't know how we're going to do that. We still don't know which topics we want to discuss with those people. We still don't know how we're going to reach all those people in every part of the world. But if you have ideas, we'll be more than grateful to hear them. And it would be really nice to chat about what you think about such a project, whether that makes sense at all, and if there might be a vision that we can all agree on.
Okay, after the demo, the call for inputs from the audience, it really sounds like a workshop here, but let's go. I like it. Philippe.
Thank you. Buongiorno. I would like to share with you another idea that we had in our newsroom at Zeit Online. Hanna already mentioned our My Country Talks project that we invented in 2017. In 2021, last year, we had a general election in Germany, and we thought about the new way to connecting our readers. So we came up with a quite crazy idea. So we thought, what if we were able to recreate a society like Germany on a small scale, to build a mini version of Germany? A group of, let's say, 49 people. Yeah, back. These are 49. 49 is the maximum amount of people that fit on a Zoom screen. That's the reason why we thought 49. But it's a large enough group to capture all major facets of German society. So our thought was we need a group which resembles Germany statistically, like so the right number of West Germans and East Germans, the right number of rich and poor, people with migration background, man, women, non-binary, and so on. And we thought, hey, how could we find such a group? And what would the group be talking about? How would they interact? What can we learn from such a group, from a small Germany? So to answer these questions, we published a call to register on our website. And to be honest, we didn't expect many people to register because the registration process was a bit complicated, and we had to ask a lot of personal questions. So we had to ask for their income, we had to ask for their education level, and so on. And the registration process was, to be honest, a bit laborious. But to our surprise, just 3 weeks, after 3 weeks, 30,000 people registered for a project. So we had like a problem because we had these 30,000 people. And we then asked our data scientist on the right, Andreas Loos, he's one of the heroes in this story. He's a math guy, very useful to have such skills in the newsroom, by the way. We asked him to work with the data, and he designed a software especially for the project. You can see a snippet of the software on the left. And the software calculated a group of 49 people from the 30,000, a small scale representation of German society. So how did that work? It was simple and complicated at the same time. The algorithm mixed in the right amount, the right proportion of rich people compared to German society, the right amount of right proportion of people with education or with an academic degree, or without education, the right amount of people from the north, the right amount from the people from the south, always compared to the same proportions as they exist statistically in Germany. And we did that across 19 dimensions, so education, income, gender, and so forth. So then we had a list of 49 people. And then we called them and asked them to join. And the first list was almost perfect, like a perfect result. Then we called the people, and some decided not to join, others were super surprised and happy to join us. We had to replace some of them, and the software had to recalculate and so on. And at the time, we began photographing and filming the first participants. This process took us 2 months. And then there was this one day when Julius Tröger, who's our head of visual journalism, showed me this. And this was the complete 49 people, a very diverse group. All of them have never met before. And we introduced this group to our readers. As you can see, we made a short video sequence of each of them. And then, maybe I can tell you a bit more about, maybe can you go to the next one? Yeah, I will tell you a bit, some of them, just 3 or 4 of them. This is Hartmut Lamprecht. During his life, he had a lot of different jobs. For many years, he was unemployed, and today he's a taxi driver in Hamburg, and he calls himself a loser, and he was part of the group of the 49. There was Ulrike Neubauer, who voted for leftist parties for many, many years, and then she turned into a protest voter. This is Clara Staats. She's the youngest, 18 years old. And this is Shaima Taleb, a childcare worker who migrated from Egypt. She has been living in Germany for 28 years, and she says too many times she gets asked where she actually comes from. maybe the last one, this is Günther Stäblein. He's a caretaker worker in a hospital in southern Germany and a voter of the Green Party. So a very diverse group in many ways, and these people came from all parts of the society. So in June last year, they met for the first time on Zoom, and we streamed that meeting live. And since then, the group met weekly at Zoom and discussed a lot of topics like social justice, the future of mobility, Angela Merkel's chancellorship. And every week, people of color met white pensioners, the unemployed met wealthy privateers, some academics met people without a professional qualification, and they discussed topics that they think matter the most. And to our surprise, some of them became friends during that time. So last December, after 6 months, the group met for the last time. It was a very emotional moment, and but the group is still in contact, and now we are thinking about how we can develop this idea further. Maybe you have some ideas. Obviously, this time it worked, but maybe we can do something else with this idea and with this method. Yeah, but maybe this is up for the discussion. Thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss and answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, Hanna, and Emily. I guess the question I assume lots of journalists would have is, why is this on us to do that? Why do we have to facilitate conversation in our societies? Is this really, how does it relate to our role as journalists at all? Who wants to go first? Emily?
I think it's a really interesting question. Oops, can you hear me? Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question because it almost assumes that journalists are outside society and there's all the stuff going on and we're outside having no influence, we just report the truth. But of course we're all part of society, and the work that we do day in, day out is contributing to the narrative, the stories that we tell each other as part of that society. And so what we do by default is often talk, as you said earlier, Nina, about the stories of conflict. We are having a very big influence. We need to own that, I believe. And I think through these sorts of initiatives that we've been hearing about today, there's an opportunity to a little bit reset what normal conversation looks like. And that's why I believe that our work is so important. You know, if only a very few people take example by seeing the 49 people in Philip's scheme, and they see these new friendships between the white pensioner and a young person of color, then who knows what new conversations can happen. We are demonstrating a new, different way of engaging with strangers, and it may create whole cascades of other conversations. We can't measure it. We can't attribute it to the work that we do, but I still believe it's happening, and it's pretty exciting. When I was talking in Lebanon to some of the people who took part in the training that I did last year, one of them is a teacher at school. Prior to this, she never wanted to talk to Syrian immigrants, never wanted to talk to people or be friendly with somebody who didn't wear a veil. Now, at her school, she does a story on fasting. She's teaching a course on fasting in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity, and in a whole host of religions. And half a day a week, she's working at a school for Syrian refugees, and in fact has become really strong friends with her. Had I not followed up and asked people for stories, I wouldn't have known that. But to me, that's part of what we can do, and that's really exciting. And it's a broader way to understand journalism and to acknowledge our responsibility.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But also, I would remind us that staging debates and initiating debates is something that newspapers did all the time. I work for Die Zeit, which is the online edition of Die Zeit, which is a weekly, and the Zeit has a long tradition of initiating and staging debates. So I think we just use new methods, and we include our readers. And this is something that we are able to now in online journalism, and I think this is beautiful. And I also think I'm always surprised when we do reporting about this new conversations. I'm always surprised how people interact with each other, how they find new arguments, how they find new perspectives, and I think this is absolutely crucial. And I think it's also part of our job to provide that.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's also in a way reconnecting to a role that we have to understand in all its complexity what our society looks like, and build bridges so that we make society together and we make the best decisions for ourselves. There is a question also about, is there a need? Well, I do have an opinion, because at the Solution Journalism Network, we're training and supporting journalists in covering, broad issues or polarizing issues differently, either with the solutions lens, but also with techniques that Emily also uses, that comes from conflict mediation to help journalists really listen. And the point that you made, Emily, earlier about, have you ever had listening skills training, or to what extent are you listening your sources or your audience? I think it poses the question, how far do we need to support the citizens who are meeting through your platforms and your events? How far we need to support them with tools that will help them have meaningful and constructive conversations, and also have, what the journalists in their reporting process, or what kind of interview skills they need to gain to do this work better.
I mean,
it is really interesting, because initially when we did the Crossing Divide season, so for example with local radio, I got 39 of our local radio stations to each pick 3 local divides across England, and to bring people together on these divides, like, shall we have a statue for Margaret Thatcher, or meat eating versus veganism in a Welsh area. And I did do some work with all of these journalists, and we did talk about how to have these conversations. But it's my belief that in order for people to be able to have better conversations across divides, they do need to do some training. And in my work, I talk to a lot of academics who have done research in this field. And it can work. It can work brilliantly, but it can also have problems. And I'd actually be interested to hear from you guys what your experience has been, because you've brought so many people together across different, what training did you give them, and what were the results? And if you want to be honest, to tell us where things didn't go so well. I mean, we think a lot about safeguarding, so that's why the training that we're going to be doing, we've got counsellors at hand. We are not only doing the training in working with deep listening, and we thought about this a lot in Lebanon post-conflict story. People can leave their breakout rooms the moment they had a problem, but we're hoping that with these skills, we're going to enable them to have better conversations, and we actually have 3 people as another safeguard, so the observer can sort of put up a virtual hand if they feel they're not using the sort of template that we're offering to them. But I'm very interested from your experiences.
I mean, our concept so far has really been to give at hand some basic rules of how to have a conversation in some sort of guideline. And the biggest aim was to establish or give the opportunity for conversations that are not being watched, right? Because what we see in public debate is that we feel the urge to confirm certain filter bubbles, to get applause by our peer group, right? And that is something that is causing polarization. So we wanted to make sure those people have a conversation privately and are not being watched by anyone. What the research is showing us, for instance, this current study that is being conducted on Germany Talks, is that once people have talked not only about those political questions we have asked them, but also about things such as sports, hobbies, something they share, something they have in common, the effect on effective polarization was the biggest. So I think what we need to make sure in future kind of concepts, also with regard to the World Talks, is that we do not only match people based on political divides, but also on commonalities, so that they find a way to kind of reconnect through different dimensions.
Maybe I would like to add something, because as Hanna mentioned, we matched thousands and thousands of people, and now we had these 49 people in the room. And especially with the 49, we weren't sure how it would work out, to be honest. I mean, like, of course, you don't know who's in the group, and maybe there's this one person who destroys everything or whatever. But this didn't happen. And even those who had more extreme views were very polite in this group. And the group was also how should I say, it corrects itself in a way. So for example, if someone came up with an extreme idea, there were 3-4 people raising their hands and giving arguments against that, and trying to correct this, and it was very interesting to see the dynamic. So we did it for 6 months, and with a lot of topics: migration, racism, traffic, all these hot topics, and it didn't escalate during that time. So, and I tend to, after these experiences, I tend to trust the people more than maybe 4 or 5 years ago when we started the project, because I strongly believe that they are really able to have this conversation, and if they sit together and it's just the 2 people, and now they have to talk, I don't know, something happens. I mean, like, the people change their tone, change their behavior. So we were like, yeah, for us it was a positive experience.
And maybe just adding up to that, with regard to the question you asked right in the beginning, I mean, I don't think the approach should be, what do we need to do in order to enable something? You know, what is kind of this work that journalists needs to accomplish? I think we need to look more towards, okay, what is actually happening? Yeah? What are people doing? How does reality actually look like? And that's what we need to portray. I think journalism has done many mistakes in only giving black and white stories, only focusing on conflict, but that is not reality. So instead of kind of inventing or accomplishing new concepts and visions, it's just about, okay, listen to what is actually happening and try to portray that in a sensitive way.
Yeah, I find it super interesting that for an initiative that aims at rebuilding trust towards journalism, it also actually allowed journalists to trust the people more. And so it shows that it's a both-way relationship, and that's maybe an impact that you had not foreseen. What kind of other impact are we seeing? Like, it's with the numbers you showed, Hanna, and the number of the people who registered, despite the technical burden of registration for your experiment. it seems like there is high demand. And I've seen that myself also doing trainings in newsrooms on those techniques that the BBC also uses. The demand from journalists is also there. So there is no question on whether this is a good idea or if people are ready for it. But what kind of other impact are you seeing from those conversations that really go deep and beyond the simplification of how we tell stories? Emily?
Well, to be honest, it's quite hard to evaluate impact. So when we have done the Crossing Divide stories, we get a lot of comments, and that's fantastic, but it's not as if we really know what actions people are going to take. Because, you're doing this TV, it's really hard to get feedback from TV, all the stories we told on TV, on radio. We know the numbers, which were really, really strong, but beyond that, we didn't. Now, for this 1,000 project, we are working with academics, and we're making it rigorous. Because a lot of projects, they ask people at the beginning and at the end, and surprise, surprise, they all say, I feel much more passionately about meeting across divides, because you've bloody well told them that they need to meet across divides. So we're doing a control group, so we're getting 60 out of 250. I'm actually going to be training people in groups of 250 to 300 each, and so that I can evaluate slight differences. But there's going to be 60 in each group who we're going to be talking to, and they are having a conversation with no training. And then we're going to compare those conversations, both by their own responses, but also by people watching them on Zoom, with people who then have a conversation after those 3 weeks of training and talking to each other and things. So it's like jury's out. We've argued a lot about the questions we're going to ask and how many of them, but we've got, I think, a really good way to evaluate their ability to listen and what I'm most interested in, what I would like to achieve is much better ability to listen, more confidence with having conversations with people who they disagree with, and better able to both listen and more confident to speak in those conversations. And those are the things that we're going to be measuring with academics. So it's very, very rigorous. It's got to go through a lot of processes. Not something that journalists are used to doing, but I really want to know, because I'm personally very inspired by that sort of impact and want to check what's going on as part of my own deeper, ongoing research in this area.
Yeah, maybe adding to that, so the major result that we got from the study on Germany Talks, which was conducted by a Harvard and Stanford scholar recently, was that after they had met someone from another political spectrum, they viewed those persons as positively or ranked them as highly as people from their own political party. So by conducting pre- and post-surveys, they were able to establish, okay, once they had a conversation, there's actually such a reduction on effective polarization that people rank them as highly as their peer group. And I think that is very promising. What we will need to establish, I think, in the future is how sustainable is that impact. And that's something which is really exciting to explore, I think.
Yeah, maybe I would mention one impact of the 49 project, because I think this is one thing I learned during the last 2 years. It's a very good idea to listen to normal people and to listen what they have to say and listen to what their life is about, what they think. And the 49 were so different, 49 so different lives and living conditions as well. It was so interesting to listen to them and hear what are their problems, how do they view politics, and so on. And for us as a newsroom based in Berlin, of course we go out and talk to people, but we had like now 49 people telling us every day how their life is in a small town somewhere in the south and whatever. It was such a big resource for us that we were super unhappy to let them go, because it wasn't every day. It was like 49 windows to our country, and especially in the year of the federal election, for us it was very, very, very helpful.
Well, I'm thankful for IJF to allow us to remind journalists that it's actually a good idea to listen to people. And Emily is going to show us how to do that. Time for the show.
Yeah. Although I'm sure there's probably a lot of people with a lot of expertise in the room, because that's what I usually find. So we're going to do a demo, and I'm looking for a volunteer. I can ask Nina or one of these guys, but I thought let's just do it for real, yeah? So I'm going to ask you to tell me something about your first name, your last name, or your nickname, and then I'm going to go and we'll have a conversation around that. So it's not very scary. Does anybody want to volunteer, or I could volunteer someone, or Nina? So what do you reckon? Hands up who wants Nina, or hands up who would like somebody from the audience, because it's more fun, and you know it's live. Yeah, so, okay, so that means that you want to come up and do it.
Somebody from the audience.
Come on. That's quite a good trick. I hadn't thought about that before. And now you become a speaker, so are we allowed, is he allowed to take his mask off? While he's here as a speaker, so to speak, yeah? So now, if I move this here, do you want to say, just tell us what you're wearing so we can check the mic level, if it's okay?
I'm wearing a white shirt and feel conned.
Is that okay? Yeah? You guys can hear it. Excellent. So, I'm going to ask you, and Nina, cut us off after 4 minutes. I'm going to ask you to tell me something about your first name, your last name, or your nickname. You don't have to talk 4 minutes. We'll have a conversation.
My name is Turi, which is a Swedish name, but my mother is French, and I live in England.
So, you have an international name, a Swedish name, although your mother is French and you live in England. So I'm hearing that there's a lot of international influences, but a Swedish name. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Tell me more.
Not just international, but messy in other ways as well. My mother's Jewish, my father's Swedish Protestant. I'm neither. My wife is Italian. My children are even more confused than I am. What else can I tell you? What about you?
I'm hearing that you are saying that you've not only you began by telling me a little about this sort of melting pot, but you then told me that there's a lot more identity that you draw upon, and even more so with your children because of who your wife is. So that you're quite proud of this being able to touch all these different identities. Is that right?
I think I am proud. I'd not really thought of it as pride before. I thought of it as fact. But yeah, it's fact which makes me and my team. The thing about journalists is they're used to waiting until the other person discloses. So it sort of becomes a face-off, I suppose. Can I ask you about you? No.
So, you bring together, there is pride, but it's something you almost have taken for granted, these fact that you draw upon such a rich variety of cultures and religions. And yet, deep inside, you feel that is positive?
In the context of this conversation, I feel very strongly that our opinions and our beliefs are often anchored in things which are way below the rational, which come from our heredity, whether it's national or religious or cultural, our biological inheritance. And therefore, I think in the context of this conversation, the reason that I surface all this stuff is essentially to frame, I suppose to frame whatever opinions they may now come out with, which are disgusting and hideous and very dangerous. I want to frame them in some kind of below the iceberg understanding of where our values come from.
And I just want to check, so you're saying our values, they themselves draw upon a multiplicity of disciplines and ways of thinking and being and genetic and cultural and historical?
I think so, yes. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just ask you there, how did that feel? Do you want to come back? No. Okay, you don't have to say anything. How many questions did I ask? And I've forgotten your name, which is pretty rubbish. Turi. How many questions did I ask, Turi? 4. Well, you know, when we usually think of a question as a journalist, we think of something where we, have got a list of questions of interesting things. And what I was trying to do is not go on my agenda, and we talked about paths earlier, but follow his agenda. Although I didn't follow his agenda when he wanted to ask about me. It's pretty embarrassing. You don't usually do this in a whole audience. He didn't even volunteer, poor guy, yeah? So it's a bit of unusual circumstance. He was, But what do people feel about that process? Do you want to say again?
I'm repeating for the streaming. Do you think the conversation would have been the same without the audience?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
yeah,
that,
it felt like performance.
Yeah, it had a strong performance element, and that undoubtedly affects the way it has done it. But I did a piece, for example, I went to talk to some dairy farmers who don't believe in climate change. And I do believe in climate change, and I knew that. And I put my judgment aside to really understand, an attempt to understand why they felt what they did. And then I put it into context with a lot of facts that climate change does exist and dairy farming is a big contributor. But they still felt heard, and they were happy with that article. I published on BBC News, it wasn't news, another bit of the BBC, because they felt heard. And that, to me, is what's so important, because people will tell you things that Faigle perhaps didn't mean and didn't particularly want to share what he shared in front of everybody, so apologies. But I do believe that if you listen to people, they will go deeper. The performance element of me being quiet and waiting for him, that's kind of performance bullshit. But underneath all of that, and that aside, I think people can respond better. And when you're talking about two people are crossing divides, using those skills to engage with each other, they can really get to access what you, Philip, were talking about in terms of the humanity on the other side of the table and recognize that humanity, which is why the effective polarization goes down. They might not agree, and we're not looking for agreement, but what they will do is recognize that the other is not as other as they thought previously. Any other thoughts, questions about that?
What I really liked is that you summarized what he said, but you also enriched what he said. You gave new words so that he could come up with further answers or further.
Yeah, so I'm repeating for the streaming that you like that she summarized, but also with her own words actually explain what she got from what he was saying.
And it's okay if you get it wrong, yeah? So I attempted to not take notes. I used to take notes as a coach, always thinking I need to, and then I realized actually you need to listen with your heart. You need to feel what you feel the person is saying. You give it back to them with humility, and then they then often either correct you, go deeper, repeat, and begin a journey, a sort of journey of deeper thought, more authentic thought, which they may choose to share with you. But it's okay to get it wrong. I should say that, because often I do get it wrong. And it's actually really great when I do get it wrong, so people can, especially if I'm training lots of people, they then feel permission and feel less scared about that.
Yeah, and I would like also to surface that you listen to his silence. Like you let the space for the silence to be and the person to bring to the table what he wanted or almost wanted to bring. We still have a couple of minutes, and I'm happy to repeat or surface your comment or question.
I have a question on two very specific points, but I'd just like to give you a little bit of context because my name is Hanna Israel. I'm the former head
Oh, hello.
Uh,
Hi.
And in 2003, I launched, by chance, a program for the BBC called Point Debate, or Point for Debate. That was around the war on Iraq. And what was intended to be a 2-hour program once, just we wanted to try it, ended up being a daily program twice a day, actually, for 6 days a week. And it influenced my life afterwards. Everything I did after that had an audience component to it. Come 2020, I launched an initiative to create a platform for debate across the Middle East for Arabic-speaking people, which started as a hobby and ended up being something that is streamed on 12 different platforms. The critical issue, and I can recognize from what you have been discussing, a couple of issues that I came across throughout this journey. And the two critical issues that I find are one issue around trust and one issue around honesty. So when we talk about that shy person, or the person that comes in a group of people and talks politely, even though that we assume that he is a very strongly opinionated person, it's often met when you see, for example, in the context of somebody who is extremely religious and believes in his own beliefs that, we have to have whatever, a Christian state, or my religion should dominate the world. When they come to a collective group, they do not tend to reflect exactly what they came to offer. So you ask them about diversity in society, you ask them about other people performing their own religion in public as you do. They tend to be extremely polite in that context, but not exactly reflecting what they believe in, because deeper inside, they may believe actually it's wrong. I cannot allow anybody to perform any other sort of heretic performance in my own land where I have my own religion. Now, to reach a stage where to get people to talk openly about what they really believe in is a difficulty. And that is a precursor of being able to discuss it, because if people are not honest, then you cannot bring the controversy there. And the other issue is around how to get people to trust each other in the sense that, sometimes people believe that others are stupid, and that's why they don't believe in my ideas, which is fine. But for them to doubt the motive is the problem. So they listen to me, being somebody who believes in diversity, and it's okay to think that I'm influenced by the infidel West, or the other way around. I believe that they are sort of being paid by fanatic groups. And that is a problem, and it hinders the conversation. So for us to bring people to believe that somebody who is extremely religious to the extent of being fanatic, actually he believes in that way because he believes that this is what would make the right society. And the other way around.
I have to cut because I have signs in the back of the room that says it's over. But if I summarize and loop you, like we say as Jen, is that there is this need when you have those conversations to build trust and create a safe place for those who are not comfortable in speaking out or who are mistrustful of the other participants. So how do you create that safe place? And that's going to be our last word.
I think what is crucial, referring to what you just said, a person might think that, I don't know, we should have a religious state, yeah? That government should be controlled by a religious leader. But I think what is crucial is to ask why such a person thinks so. So not what, but why. What are their motives? What does this person want to achieve? Because I think there you can actually meet with someone that might totally oppose such a religious state, but believe that through different means we get into a state that is as good as the other person wants it to be as well, but by different means. So you know what I'm saying? Like, instead of asking for what you want to have, is why. And that might be by different means, but you can recognize that a person has same motives, same moral values, although the ways are totally different from each other.
Thank you. And I think Emily wants to send out an invite.
If people want to choose to go up to somebody in this room outside where it's COVID safe and offer to play with them and do a little deep listening to them, please be my guest and see what happens and have fun. I did this at the UN General Assembly, and people are still friends after 2 years from that conversation that they had with each other. So who knows where it will lead.
Thank you for listening.